Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Sarah Devasha Wisdom, President and CEO of Greater Louisville, Inc., and welcome to GLI's COVID-19 Help Resource. We have all been dealing with a lot of things since this pandemic began, and it's important to recognize best practices in this new virtual environment that we find ourselves in. The way that we are working and living right now has drastically changed, and it's all moving to more of an online platform, at least for the near term. We have to be aware of the increasing opportunity for hackers and others who will take advantage of this additional usage. And so we're grateful to have a representative from GLI investor Dean Dorton with us this morning to discuss this. Jason Miller is the Director of Business and Technology Consulting for Dean Dorton. Jason's primary technical focus is in the area of technology consulting, and he is responsible for managing the evaluation, implementation, and support of accounting and business management software for Dean Dorton clients. He has over 18 years in IT auditing. Before I turn things over to Jason, I'd like to briefly introduce Jenny Patterson to give us an outline for today's discussion. Jenny?
Good morning. During today's discussion, you will be able to ask questions by using the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen. You can feel free to start sending questions throughout the call. During the presentation, the GLI team will sort through questions and try to cover as many topics as possible in the time allotted at the end. For a summary of today's discussion or access to other COVID-19 resources, please check back and visit greaterlouisville.com. Today's conversation is being recorded and will also capture written chat questions during the conversation. A copy of the recording will be included in follow-up survey email. With that, thanks again for everyone's time this morning, and I'll turn it over to Jason to get us started.
Thank you, Sarah and Jenny. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. So, question we often get in the last few weeks is around cybersecurity and what concerns people need to have as they're dealing with a whole new way of conducting business. And so we've put together some information. And as we go through the session today, I want to spend some time and talk about small business cybersecurity pre-pandemic. It's important to understand where we started. Then we'll transition into our rush to work from home. So what did that increase in our vulnerabilities? And then from that, what are some short-term things that you need to be thinking about during the pandemic? Another popular topic we've been hit up with a lot in the last couple of weeks was around our online meeting tools and security. So we'll spend just a few minutes on what we found in that area. And then the final section will talk about cybersecurity post-pandemic. And some of those things, depending on how long the pandemic continues to cause us to work this way, may be things you want to consider even before we consider this finished. So it's important to understand where we started. And unfortunately, our small businesses were probably some of the most vulnerable and the least sophisticated when it comes to cybersecurity. And that is concerning because now we've entered a new area of vulnerability and further spotlighted some of the weaknesses that small businesses were already dealing with. So as industry experts, we rely on some trusted resources on where we get our information and how we try to boil that information down for our businesses and clients that we work with. And two places that we commonly get trusted information is from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. Verizon has been putting this on for probably close to 10 years now, and each year they come out with a new version and constantly improving it. Their data is collected from across the world, collected from businesses and government entities that submit information. Verizon actually has a cybersecurity incident response team that works on a lot of very sophisticated cybersecurity issues. So that data is very valuable to us. Another resource that we use is Ponemon, and with them, they have for the last 3 years conducted a global report on small business cybersecurity. And so there's some information in this report that is very specific to small businesses. And so as we go through this, I want to point out a few key things for you to keep in mind as we set the stage for where we started. So the first item I want to point out here, and this is from the Verizon report, is small businesses are prime targets. 43% of breaches involved small business victims. I would actually argue that this number is significantly higher because most small businesses probably do not report breaches that have occurred. They just deal with them and move on. Whereas if you look at the top three numbers or graphs here, we see that public sector entities, healthcare organizations, and financial industry organizations percentages, those industries require reporting, so therefore more information is provided. So to know that 43% of the breaches involve small businesses is pretty fascinating, and like I said, probably is close to double that. Another statistic that we look at is what tactics are used in breaches for businesses. And this is general businesses. This is not specific to small business, but 52% of the breaches featured some component of hacking. As we try to understand them, it's important to understand what our threats and vulnerabilities are. And we will remember this 52% will come up multiple points throughout the conversation today. 33% involve social attacks, 28% involve malware, and then 21% are casual errors. And some of these items are important, and we'll bring them up again later in the conversation, but they're important because they spotlight the vulnerability that our users bring. And so as we talk about how to improve cybersecurity in our organizations, one of the points that we'll focus on and put a lot of stress on is user awareness and education. So what of the 52% of breaches that involve hacking, what are the actions that are seen in those hacking incidents? Over 70% of hacking incidents involve stolen credentials. What's that mean? So most people think about a hacking event as this uber tech geek sitting somewhere in a dark area, writing a lot of code, trying to break into highly sophisticated organizations. At least that's what the TV portrays and leads us to believe. But what this is telling us is that the majority of the hacking incidents, and hacking is a big part of all breaches, is simply using stolen credentials from your users. That's something that we can easily fix, and it's really sad that we continue to have such a high statistic in this area. We'll talk about some of the ways that we can fix that later in the presentation. So what are some other commonalities that we've learned throughout the compilation of the data? 71% of the breaches were financially motivated. What's that mean? To me, that means that we will see this continue to be an issue for businesses as long as there's profit to be made. So the bad actors are going to be around if they think they can make some money off of the vulnerabilities that we put out there. 25% of the breaches are motivated by gain of strategic advantage, so espionage. And a lot of businesses think, well, I really don't have anything, I'm not a public entity, but you may have trade secrets, you may have opportunities for somebody to go from your business into your client's business in order to gain some proprietary information. 32% of the breaches involve phishing. So again, we come back to targeting our users, trying to prey on their vulnerabilities as we go through this process. 56% of the breaches took months or even longer to discover. And that's a really important point that we'll see later on when we talk about the issues we find in small business not having a way to even monitor or know that they have been breached or compromised. So think about the fact that it's concerning enough to realize that you have had a breach or an incident, but think about it if that bad actor had been on your network or in your system for months at a time, gathering information and doing things that you don't want to think about having happened. So now we move over to the specifics on small businesses, and the information we see here on this chart is twofold. So on the left, we've got the percentages of small businesses who have responded yes, that they've been party to a cyber attack. On the right, we see the response of yes, we have had a data breach. So it's important to understand the difference between those two. So there are lots of cyber incidents that do not result in a breach. And a breach is considered anything where sensitive data was lost or compromised. So it's concerning to me that over the last 3 years, we continue to see an increase in the number of breaches. And we also see, if we compare in 2019, the 66% of incidents versus 63% of breaches, only 3% of the businesses out there who have had a cyber incident were able to protect their data and prevent a breach. So why aren't small businesses better at cybersecurity? And so in this survey, business owners were allowed to respond to up to 3 reasons. And it's interesting, these are very common and real-world responses that we get on a regular basis as we work with our clients. Oftentimes, small businesses reference the fact that they don't have sufficient IT personnel able to help them with cybersecurity. The next highest one is insufficient budget. We don't have the funds to pay for it. The next highest, we don't have an understanding of what to even do. And these are legitimate issues or legitimate responses when businesses have not stopped to take this topic very serious. All of these are fixable. There's solutions to every one of these. If we stop and decide we're going to take this matter serious. Why do we need to start taking this more serious? If we look at some statistics on the cost of a data breach and the cost of the disruption to your business. So there are 2 components to a cyber incident or breach that we need to look at when it comes to cost. The first one is real life cost. We've got to pay somebody to help remediate and respond. We oftentimes have legal fees. We oftentimes have fines and penalties. We have the requirement to pay for credit monitoring for those who may have been compromised, depending on the severity of the compromise and the type of information. Those stats say on average it's over $1 million in cost, and these are geared towards small business. If you look at the Verizon report, they will tell you it's probably closer to $3 million for larger businesses, but our small business stat is over $1 million just in costs dealing with a breach. You add to that the disruption to your business. So let's say you have a significant breach and the impact to your business is you're shut down for a week, 2 weeks, even a month before you can get critical systems back online. Can you measure the cost of reputational damage that may be done depending on the type of industry you're in, types of clients you serve, and the severity of the breach that you had? So I would argue if you take this information and compare it to the previous slide, which says we don't have the funds or the resources to take security more serious, I would argue we don't have the luxury of not. The cost of dealing with one of these issues is far outweighs and is much larger than if we were just to spend the time on the front end to be more proactive. And it doesn't have to be all that expensive to take security more serious. So we are living in an unprecedented time, as everybody is experiencing. And so if we pause for a minute to think what happened, and not that long ago, less than a month ago, the world changed, and we all tried to shift how we do business. And as we did that, there's some key things that we saw happen. We watched many clients do this because they were unprepared. So there was a rush to get, within a matter of days, there was a period of that week to 2 week period that every single day, almost every hour, the governor and his teams were issuing new guidance and tighter restrictions. And so we went from, working in the office to a point where most offices were, that were considered not essential, had to figure out how they were going to maintain a workforce and business in a remote environment. So we watch everyone scramble, and we open up insecure remote desktop services. We layered on more people than we probably had before accessing our VPN. A lot of people ran to free third-party tools that provided remote access. Then we had the issue of devices. So most businesses probably have a lower percentage of employees that have a laptop. We've seen that increase over time where more people do have laptops, but there's still a significant number of the workforce that can still have desktop computers at the office. So what happens? We grab any spare laptop. We grab the one that is out of date with insecure operating systems that are laid on a shelf, probably haven't been patched for antivirus or any other applications or software, or we leverage the employee's home computers, which is a Pandora's box of issues potentially. Then we think about the who was involved. So now we've got a group of probably very untrained users. We have a group who is working outside of their comfort zone. So we've taken a group that's been used to coming to a very structured office with controls in place, hopefully, and we have told them now you work at home. Not only are you working at home, you're trying to probably educate your kids. You're probably dealing with spouses fighting for resources at the house, internet connectivity, and so on and so forth. And then our final component that we saw was communication. How do we communicate? Everybody raced to free video conferencing. Many users had maybe participated in a web meeting or a video conference, but probably had never hosted one. Now they're hosting multiple per day. Are people leveraging their personal email solutions? Are they using personal file shares to get information from the business back and forth to where they're working? So of all four of those, we step back and look at what kind of vulnerabilities did we just create. So now we have exposed our network to more vulnerabilities for cyber criminals to prey upon. We've now got many more devices that are vulnerable, unpatched, and processing your critical data. We've got users who, are they really prepared? We find, as some of the statistics showed us as we were going through the Verizon stats, that our users are our #1 vulnerability when it comes to cybersecurity. So now we've taken users who are already our biggest vulnerability and probably made that an exponential vulnerability for the business. And then in the communication area, where is your sensitive data? Have we given up all control of that data and who may have access to it? So all of these things are things that we need to pause now that we've seemed to have calmed down. Everybody's gotten into somewhat of a groove. We need to start to think, what can we do with regard to cybersecurity during the pandemic, and then what do we need to do after? And that line could still be a little bit blurry as we try to determine when is the end date to what we're dealing with. But during the pandemic, I would challenge you to take a look at least these 4 areas. I would challenge you to do as much as you can in all areas that we cover today, but these are things you need to do now. And from that, we look at remote access. So again, we need to make sure we did not open up insecure remote desktop protocol. That is one of the #1 vulnerabilities with regard to ransomware out there. We need to secure all remote access, whether it be to our network or to our cloud solution services with MFA, multi-factor authentication. I'll cover that in more detail later on what some of the solutions and recommendations are. But remote access to our networks and remote access to our cloud solutions is got to be one of our highest priorities as we sit here today. We need to get devices updated. So if we did scramble and grab old laptops with Windows 7 that has security vulnerabilities or out-of-date antivirus or protection tools, we need to get those updated. Depending on your capability, we may need to look at procuring new equipment and deploying to those users who may be just getting by with the old systems. I would challenge you to look at your password policies, review and implement more secure password policies. This is one of the greatest areas of weakness, especially if you don't have MFA. Weak passwords are an easy target for most businesses. These are things we can change today. There's really no cost in changing your passwords. It's more of an inconvenience or a perceived inconvenience. I can assure you that the inconvenience of a breach because your password policies are insecure is way more of an inconvenience than that it is for your users to have to deal with more secure passwords. And then if possible, getting an external vulnerability scan. Have a professional do a scan of your network to make sure your rush to work from home didn't create new vulnerabilities that we didn't have or didn't know about as we went into this current situation. We'll have more detail on each of those areas in the post-pandemic and some more specifics. But another topic we got a lot of calls about in the last couple of weeks were around our online meeting tools. And if you were paying attention to any form of media, you heard a lot about Zoom and the concerns around Zoom bombing, a whole new word that we get to use now, and the security vulnerabilities that they had. And so as we put together our cybersecurity team and our infrastructure team to evaluate what were being identified, at the end of the day, we believe there was a whole lot of media hype around that, probably more so than was deserved, but it was sexy media to talk about because everybody was rushing to use Zoom and online tools. So we have not yet found any reason to suggest everybody race away from Zoom. Some other popular tools that we see, Cisco WebEx, which we're using here today, Microsoft Teams, and then the fourth icon you see there is Google Meets, are some of the more popular ones that I've personally seen as I've worked with clients and prospects throughout this process. Cisco and Zoom both offer some best practices, and there's links to those just under their icons on those buttons for the Cisco WebEx and Zoom resources. So when the information is made available to you, you can use that to be sure your users have the best practices. But some common practices that we see, and irrelevant to the solution you're using, is use unique meeting IDs for each meeting. It's a whole lot harder for somebody to hack into a revolving meeting ID than it is if you continue to use the same one over and over again. Require passwords and pings to gain access to meetings so that the person facilitating that has control over who's getting in and when people come in. Privately shared meeting invitations. We saw a lot of meeting invites going out via social media. The cyber criminals spend a lot of time on social media, so let's don't put those out there. A lot of the tools offer a personal room versus official meeting rooms, and those just provide some conveniences to your users. One of the issues with those are it doesn't create a unique ID each time. So in those tools, you should enable the lobby or waiting room functionality to affirm people entering into the meeting so you don't have any unwanted guests interrupting your meeting. And then if your users are using the client installed applications versus just using their web browsers to access the tools, and most people use the installed application because you get more functionality, you want to be sure that those are being updated regularly, especially Zoom, as they had security issues spotlighted. They were releasing updates to that system regularly. You want to be sure your users are operating on the latest and greatest secure solutions. So again, just reiterating the fact that the systems themselves are still usable systems. but we need to enable our users to be best users and best practices of using those systems. So as we think about what do we need to do as small businesses for cybersecurity post-pandemic, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I would challenge you even to consider doing some of these even during the pandemic, especially depending on how long it takes for us to come out of this, and also knowing that our workforce could potentially be changed, for many months or years to come. Consider some of these key solutions. So when we talk to clients about cybersecurity considerations, we think about it in terms of what tools do we have to protect our systems and our networks and our software and our users. We often ask, have you had a cyber assessment conducted? And if you have you done it recently? It's not okay just to have one every 5 years. Things change very quickly. You make changes in your environment very frequently, and any of those changes could have opened up vulnerabilities that may not have existed at the time you had your last assessment. So we recommend those at least annually, if not more frequently, if you have many changes to your system. Another key component that we highly recommend is a user awareness training. As we've talked about throughout this session, we've had, the fact that our users are our biggest vulnerability and weakness. So we need to make sure we prepare them for the threats that they have coming at them. And then, if you recall, one of the graphs talked about the fact that the average breach goes unnoticed for up to a month or many months. So do you have monitoring tools in place to be able to alert you in a situation where you might have a cyber incident or a breach, or hopefully if it's an incident that you get alerted in time that you can prevent it from becoming a breach. So as we look at information security programs for our clients, we have 3 key areas that any good cybersecurity program is made up of. We have the people, the technology, and the process. Most people think information security is all about the technology and the tools to provide protection, but we've got to have processes in place to leverage those tools. We've got to have controls in place that help us to make sure those tools are being leveraged to their greatest potential. And then as we talked about, our people are our biggest weakness, and our people are on the front lines of using the tools that we give them, and we need to educate them and make sure they're equipped. We don't take a new hire and put them on the front lines with our clients without teaching them about our business, without teaching them about how to serve those clients well. Why would we hand them a bunch of tools and technology without providing them the proper education and training? So with that, we talked about the 52% of breaches featured hacking, and then we talked about the use of stolen credentials. 70-some% of the hacking events were from use of stolen credentials. And then we see a new statistic that phishing and use of stolen credentials are the top threat actors, ways of doing that. And so phishing often leads to getting users to give up their stolen credentials. And so we highly recommend a user awareness program. This is a continual program and a process to keep users up to date on new threats as they come out. It also typically includes some testing for users to be sure that new techniques that threat actors are using are tested upon them in a controlled environment, and that we re-educate when necessary. The users are on our front lines, and no matter what technologies or tools we put in place, if we don't have the users properly prepared, it could negate the best tools. And I often think about it in terms of it doesn't do you any good to have a lock on your door if you fail to lock it at night, or to have the most expensive security system if your teenage child doesn't set the alarm when they leave, or turns it off when you think it's set. That allows the bad actors to still have access. The next area we look at are the processes and controls. And so that starts with a risk assessment. What are the risks to our business? No two businesses are the same. They deploy different tools and technologies. They have different information. They serve clients in different ways. So we need to have a risk assessment process that's not just a technology exercise. It should involve multiple areas of the business to understand what is our sensitive information, what are we trying to protect, and what are the opportunities that someone could take advantage of and misuse that information. And it must be continual. It's not a one-time event. Risks change. Threat actors continue to improve or change their tactics, and we need to make sure that our risks stay in line with that. We need to have a good information security program. As I mentioned, that should include people, process, and technology. So we need to have good policies and procedures. We need to have good education. We need to have good tools, and we need to have a continual roadmap for improvement. We need to have monitoring and response. So we have all these things in place. Even the most secure places will have an incident. So the key to having an incident is, do we know we have one, and can we respond fast enough to keep it from becoming a breach? And so with that, we need tools in place for early detection so that someone is not on our system for months at a time before we know they're there. And then once we do identify someone, do we have the right plans in place to respond appropriately? And then finally, we often look at the processing controls for business continuity. Do we have documentation and planning? Do we have strong and reliable backups that will be there for us when we need them? So a lot of small businesses really struggle with the assessment component. And the reason for that is it goes back to that number one statement that we don't have the budget. And historically speaking, cyber assessments are very complex and very expensive for most businesses. I generally try not to be very salesy in these kind of presentations, but being part of an accounting firm and someone focused on business, I often bridge the gap between business and our technology experts that serve clients. And one of the areas that I'm most proud of is a product that's proprietary to Dean Dorton called the Dean Dorton Cybersecurity Scorecard. And this was designed specifically for small businesses to be able to get an affordable assessment that not only is affordable, but is actionable and understandable by a non-technical person. So it took us over a year to come up with this. And it was a lot of back and forth between business owners and business-minded people and our technology team to try to come up with a solution that we could deliver in a cost-effective manner, but still not sacrifice the value and the benefit. So we have been performing these for clients over the past year, and it's a solution that delivers actionable items that a non-technical person can do. And so we see this is often for small businesses one of the starting points for where do I go, where do I start, how do I improve? And so with this, as we go through one of these assessments, you get a roadmap. As we consult with clients on their cybersecurity model and programs, we have a couple of different models. And the one on the left is our small business model, and it starts with that scorecard, but then it rolls through a process to get started on launching a true information security program. Most small businesses don't have that in place. So we do the assessment, we build a roadmap, we look at security policies and procedures, we look at implementing security awareness, but then we move into an ongoing activity lifecycle. And so that is annual, semi-annual, or quarterly assessments, reviewing those logs on at least a monthly basis so that we get that monitoring in place, continual user awareness for our users, incident response if needed, and remediation and continual improvement. When we deal with larger to medium-sized businesses, A lot of times those type of organizations have a information security program in place, and we start with evaluating the maturity of it. And then from that, help the client build a roadmap. And then they too move into this continual program management where we have a continual risk assessment, continual user awareness and security training, incident response and reporting capabilities. So I'm more of a visual person, and I think these diagrams help you understand the full life cycle of what's required for a robust information security program. So as we look at the technology components of a information security program, there are a whole host of solutions not even listed here, but one of the four of the main areas that we look at when we look at technology for small business when it comes to cybersecurity, multi-factor authentication is one of the most important. So we talk a lot about the stolen credentials and the issues that are had because of the loss of user ID and password. Multi-factor authentication eliminates the majority of those situations because it requires a secondary layer of proving that you're the right person before you connect to any system or gain access to a system. We often see Duo or Okta or RSA as common solutions in that area. The next area is next generation antivirus. So the days of just standard antivirus are behind us, and it's interesting. If I go back even 25 years ago, no one questioned the need to install antivirus. We all assume that is a given today. So these other tools are in their infancy and hopefully on the way to a point where no one really argues when you're suggested to put some of these tools in place. But with next generation antivirus, it takes it to that next level from malware protection and continual monitoring of cyber activity on end user devices. Advanced web filters. A lot of websites are compromised. Even legitimate sites that we go to today could have been hijacked and are dropping on bad actor information onto your system. And so having an advanced web filter that's dynamic and helps identify compromised sites and keep users from going to them is important. And then advanced email protection, advanced spam filtering and solutions. Solutions like an AppRiver, Proofpoint, or Barracuda are often needed. A lot of users today leverage Office 365, and Microsoft does include some spam filtering in there. We still recommend a secondary solution in addition to what you might have in a standard email solution. Some other considerations as you think about cybersecurity in a small business. Most small businesses have shifted to an Office 365. Have someone evaluate your Office 365 security and controls. A lot of people assume that Microsoft's protecting them. They're not. There are a number of different licensing models that you can do. The cheaper licensing models have very limited controls. It often takes additional licensing levels to have the true security required. And then even if you have those licensing levels, you have to have a technology professional who understands them, actually configure them so they work. So you may be paying for things that aren't actually working in your favor. As we look at a remote workforce, this may become more common. The need to react. Should more of your users have laptops? As you think about doing your budgeting and cycling to new equipment, let's think about should we have more users with laptops available? Should we have virtual desktop solutions in place so that we can facilitate that work from anywhere more securely and more efficiently? Should we be looking at other cloud solutions that don't even require a remote desktop at all? Are all of our resources just available anytime, anywhere? With passwords, we've mentioned the need to increase your passwords. We've seen a lot of movement on this area over the past couple of years. It used to be people would suggest changing your password every 90 days. If you have some of these other things in place, we actually argue change them less frequently so that users don't complain about having to have more complex ones. We actually highly recommend a password filter. Password filter helps keep users from using common passwords that get compromised in brute force attacks against your systems. So if every user had to change every 90 days, they may try to pick like spring 2020, summer 2020, fall 2020, so on and so forth, and those become common passwords that bad actors try to leverage. And so a password filter would deny a user from using what we know is a common list of compromisable passwords. And then a minimum length of 12 with all your typical security features. And then the final area that we can't stress enough are backups, multiple different backup solutions. A new common issue that we've seen is needing to have what's referred to as an air gap in your backups. A lot of the common ransomware attacks are actually encrypting your backups so that you can't resort to backups if you don't have them properly segregated and moved away from where a compromised credential could impact them as well. And then this has been the case for years, but people still don't do it, is test the backups regularly. It's one thing to have backups, but it's another one to have one that actually works when you need it. So the one thing that I would do if I were in your shoes today would be make sure I have multi-factor authentication deployed on any remote access, on any cloud-hosted service, and on any email solution. It's fairly inexpensive considering, and it will cut down on a very large number of security incidents and compromises that we see. A couple other final thoughts that I didn't mention throughout the presentation in other areas would be just to make sure you've got cyber insurance in place. It's important to have cyber insurance. It's important to understand what that insurance covers, and it's important to also understand what your responsibilities are with regard to that policy. We have a few resources at Dean Dorton that you'll have available. The Dean Dorton Insights are updated regularly as we produce new information on trending topics. We have a site dedicated to remote work tool solutions and a site dedicated to cybersecurity. I will turn it back over to Sarah and Jenny to see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Jason. We appreciate that presentation. Very, very informative. Do you have a few questions that have come through? Cybersecurity is an important factor in business. We all know this. And why more so in this crisis do you think, what have you seen from a security perspective?
Right. So as we all know, most of the cyber incidents that we see are opportunistic. And we know that criminals prey upon our opportunities or our weaknesses that we put out there. So as we discussed, the rush to work from home took a population who was probably vulnerable to begin with and made them more vulnerable. And so it's a little hard to say that we're seeing a significant increase in cyber incidents because unfortunately we were dealing with a lot prior to the pandemic, but we continue. So the pandemic has not slowed the bad actors down. It is actually, empowered them to continue and do more. And so we continue on a regular basis to respond to companies who have been breached or have cyber incidents, and we see that continuing to trend up as we go.
Excellent, thank you. Just a friendly reminder to everyone to please use your chat feature to ask questions. So for small businesses that may not have a full IT department, what are the major takeaways that business owners should be implementing when trying to keep their business cyber safe?
So the thing that I think about with that question would be find a trusted partner, a trusted advisor. If we think about the reasons in the statistics or in the survey of why small businesses don't take security more serious, it was because they don't have anyone on staff. So find a trusted partner. It's worth the investment. Remember, the cost of a breach are so high, and especially now, businesses are just trying to hang on in the current situation. Imagine having to deal with a cyber incident in the middle of just trying to keep the business running. It may be the final nail in a coffin for a number of businesses to try to deal with a cyber incident or breach in the middle of the already stressed environment that we're working under right now. And then the other thing I would remind again at this point would be have that cyber insurance policy. So a lot of people just assume their general liability policy will cover them. In some cases, it may, up to a very limited number, but having a separate cyber policy or a rider specifically for it is very helpful, so that if you were to be compromised, at least you've got some protection on the financial components as it relates to the cost of responding. But it's also important to understand what that policy does and does not cover. And it's also really important to understand what your responsibilities are as a business before you sign up for that policy, because there are certain things that you're probably agreeing to do that you're probably not doing. And if you were to have to use that policy and the insurance company could prove that you didn't do what you said you would, they may not have to pay for the incident.
Excellent. Thank you for expanding on that cyber insurance point. I see a question in the chat box about whether or not we're going to share the presentation. We will be sharing this recording. It will be on our website, www.greaterlouisville.com. So you can always access it after we close this webinar. You shared the one thing you would do first for security being MFA. What is the second?
It's hard to say what the second is, because I actually have a three-way tie for second if I had to say that. The first one of those three would be the Office 365. We've seen so many people move to Office 365 in the last 2 to 3 years and assume that they're secure, and it's not. And a lot of the incidents that we've responded to recently have been compromises to people's email and fraudulent messages being sent to then do the phishing and access other information. The second would be the password policies and controls. And then the third would be the external assessment. And I might actually elevate the external assessment up, because that would draw out the other two and help prioritize them in everything you need to do. But again, the first thing I would do would be multi-factor authentication. That would just cure so many of the issues that we've seen. If you just watched any of the stats in the graphs that we showed throughout the presentation, stolen credentials is such a big issue. And if we had the multi-layer of authentication, it wouldn't matter as much that their user ID and password was compromised, because the threat actor would not have access to the second layer of authentication.
Got it. So number two is tied. So if a small business is temporarily closed due to COVID-19, how can they continue to monitor their cybersecurity? That sounds like a very difficult task if the business is temporarily closed.
Well, it's even tougher, I would say, because I would tell you that probably 90+% of small businesses couldn't monitor even if they were open. If you think about the statistic that we had, that over 2/3 of the cyber incidents and breaches go months undetected, even when businesses are operating. And a lot of the things that we've investigated over the years, you see that things have gone on for weeks or months, and it's not until the bad actor decides they're finished with you that they've gotten everything that they can get. So now they're going to ransomware your data and try to get some additional hostage funds from you to get the encryption key to unlock your data. So that's usually when most businesses realize they have an issue, is when their files or their entire systems become encrypted and they can't access them. So, you know, it's a real challenge from a monitoring perspective. So if the business is closed, you know, the security really is going to be a challenge for most small businesses, unfortunately.
Very, very helpful. So I think that addresses all of the questions that we've received today. So I will just close us out here. Thank you again, Jason, for this informative presentation. And thanks to all of you who have joined us today. We are in this together, and as the voice of the business community, we're going to continue to bring helpful information to you to help you manage your business and manage through this crisis. We're going to help you get through this. As a reminder, the session was recorded. It will be on our website. And we do have our next virtual call on Thursday morning. It'll be a little bit lighter than some of the recent topics we've explored. It's called Caffeine and Quarantine, Coffee with Your Chamber, and it's a social hour from 10:30 to 11:30. So please join us, and we will answer any questions you might have and talk through any issues, and just enjoy a little bit of coffee during this quarantine. So if you have any questions or need anything, please let us know, and we thank you again to Dean Dorton for leading this presentation and bringing us this information. Thank you.